wonderful to be here with you today again, Alex. You are, of course, the founder and CEO of Strategyzer, the corporate innovation strategy tools and training organization that does brilliant work. You're the co-author of 5 books, actually more than 5 books, including The Invincible Company, The Business Model Canvas, and, of course, a visiting professor at the IMD Business School, a new appointment. Congratulations. And a proud, very proud Swiss citizen, if not ambassador, and a wonderful person. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. We're going to talk about, obviously, innovation in the context, which is often quite difficult for organizations, how you measure it, incentivize, encourage it. And as always on Answer for the Line, we're going to delve into you and your own motivations and your organization. So quite a lot to cover off. Let's talk about that context. And I'm an optimist by nature, but many organizations I work with are facing a challenging context in terms of difficult economic conditions, volatility, whether that's commodity prices, all the way through to geopolitical uncertainty. What does that mean for how they think about and practice innovation?
So, I think one of the words that is very popular today is also resilience. And we sometimes tend to forget that resilience also means being innovative, right? Being able to get up and do things differently. So the challenge that most established companies have is to run an existing business and invent the future at the same time, right? We call that exploit, explore. Now, in a challenging economic environment where you have things, popping up, like we had the pandemic, we have wars, we have tons of things, all of a sudden your exploit business crumbles, and what used to work for so long and looked so stable doesn't anymore. So you're forced to explore. But if you thought about, creating that organization, academics like to call the ambidextrous organization, that can run, exploit the business and invent the future at the same time. If you have that structure, no crisis will be able to disrupt you. And a good example is Airbnb. When the pandemic hit, you're in the travel industry, that's difficult, right? Now, they had to let go 25% of their staff. They did it in an extremely respectful way. But at the same time, they were ready for this kind of, situation and disruption, in the sense that they still have this entrepreneurial DNA. So they are very resilient. So companies that are good at innovation are by definition way more resilient. So I think, we sometimes look at innovation as a nice to have. Is actually your survival tactic, right? If you can't innovate, it's going to be very hard to survive in the next 5-10 years.
That's a great way to frame it, because as you say, many people think innovation is a luxury or a hobby in good times, whereas actually it's an essential part of just running a high-performing organization. I mean, one of the most recent insights that I've enjoyed listening to and reading is obviously your approach and your challenge to OKRs, which are a mainstay in many organizations, if not a religion. In some, I mean, if you counter them, it's like, how dare you? It's like they've got tattoos on their arms on OKRs. You prefer something different. So tell me what doesn't work about OKRs and why your approach is even better.
Yeah, excellent question. And I'd say, they do work for execution, and I'm proposing an extension, right? And let me kind of scribble this maybe to just show what I mentioned before is that challenge between running a business. Here, OKRs, objectives and key results, very powerful. You set an objective and you're going to measure the key results of getting there. But here's the thing. In exploration, where you have high uncertainty, you have to admit something that most companies don't admit. You have an objective of making revenue from a new product, and you don't even know if you can make that revenue. You can't call it an objective. You actually have to call it something else, all right? Let me get out of the way here so we can get to adding that. You're not talking about OKRs, objectives. You're talking about an aspiration. We want to make, 1 million, 10 million, 500 million more from this new business area. But since we don't know, let's admit that's an aspiration. So what do? Do we measure, how we're getting closer to that aspiration? No, we're measuring with key insights. Is that even possible? And if it's not, because we learned, we're going to kill it, right? Now, why do I call this differently? Because you could say, oh, that's an OKR as well. But if you call it the same way, guess what? People are going to behave the same way. So you can say, oh, that's an OKR for innovation. But what happens is all of a sudden, people are going to fall into the execution trap,
Yes.
and
Yes.
they're going to start to execute a fantasy. But in innovation, you actually need to say, no, we're testing, we're adapting, and if we learn there's nothing there, we kill it, we retire it. So you condemn the teams to succeed if you call it an OKR that they have to achieve. That's why I'm just saying, make it different, put a different word. OKRs for something that's achievable, put some stretch goals because that's barely achievable, but you know where you're going. AKIs, aspirations and key insights, for anything that you'd like to achieve, but you admit you don't know yet. And then the process that goes with that, how you measure it, even how you lead those teams is going to be fundamentally different. So again, it comes back to just distinguishing as a person, when am I in exploit? When am I in explore? You need to turn that switch on and off. Are you in execution mode? Are you in exploration mode? And most people can't easily make that switch. And if you tell them it's the same word, they're going to say, well, why do I need different processes to do the same thing? No, it's different. Yeah. It's a different word.
It's a great vehicle to encourage that. It's a great vehicle, isn't it, to encourage that switch, because people either get into the they talk a good game on innovation, but actually really they've got that execution mindset, exploitation mindset. At the same time, I find, I'm sure you, I know you do too, because I've seen it in some of your work, the exploration aspects are under measured. They're sort of either given completely free rein, or they're giving a set of indicators that really are around exploitation. Yeah. So I think this is a great vehicle to sort of separate out the two.
I think that's a very, very important point you're making there, is that today, I would say, and I'm in this domain, right, that innovators are getting a free pass. And they say, yeah, but spreadsheets, that's for exploit. Well, I'll push back and say, no. So if you can't produce results and measure the return on investment, you're not serious about what you're doing. It's not because you're innovation that you're not supposed to create a return on investment. But here's the thing. You measure the return on investment very differently in innovation. Yes. So in execution, let's say we're going to build a new factory. You have a budget, you can plan how many more widgets that factory is it could produce, and then you'll sell it. So you can plan and execute. So you have return on project, right? Return on the investment of the project. In innovation, the way it actually works is you invest in 10 ideas and projects, and 2 of those might actually succeed. So you invest into a portfolio, and you'll have return on portfolio, and that can be guaranteed. Because after 12 weeks, you're going to kill maybe 8 of those projects. You're only going to invest in 2. So it's a completely different approach, but you can very well measure, A, how you're reducing risk and uncertainty. We now know how to do that. And B, you can measure the return on portfolio, because if you're not producing innovation results, you're doing innovation theater. And that's just not good enough anymore. So I believe innovators got a free pass for way too long.
Yeah. Gosh, he's being hard on his client base, which is refreshing to hear.
Yes, but they're getting there. That's the good thing, right? They're getting there.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of your work and your team's work at Strategyzer is clearly about encouraging, tooling up people in innovations teams to do this. How do you go beyond that, i.e. creating an innovation mindset and practice throughout the organization? So it's not just in the business development team, the strategy team, the corp dev team, and so on, but throughout. How do you take it from scaling it up in terms of mindset and practice? What does it take?
Excellent question. And I think what's important to point out, I mean, I love business tools and processes, right? But that's just part of the equation. So I do believe that bottom up, there's some good work. Innovation teams do good work. The people use the tools, but that's not enough. Innovation happens bottom up through the teams and the people, but top down, the leadership needs to create the innovation culture. So as a leader, you don't pick the ideas, you create the system so that the best ideas and teams can emerge, right? That's what you need to do. So where do you start? This is a very simple thing. It's the CEO should spend at least 40% of their time on innovation. If that's not the case, you're never going to get an innovation culture. Why? Well, if the boss is not doing it, why should I take that seriously? So it's not important. So again, it's not the CEO who's going to pick the ideas or the teams, but it's the CEO who puts in place this system where exploration has as much power as exploitation, where you have different KPIs and different metrics, they live in harmony and they collaborate. That's what leadership can do. And number one, that's going to start with 40% of the CEO's time committed to innovation, 40% of the leadership meetings committed to innovation, regular portfolio review. You do that, a lot of the rest is going to happen automatically. And then at layer two, reporting to the CEO, you have a person who is 100% responsible for innovation. And that's a person with power and budget because we have people responsible for innovation in every company, but they have zero power and zero budget. And that's just not good enough anymore. So you start with that. The whole culture question is going to fall in place. And then you have the KPIs, you have the formal and informal rules. That's relatively easy and straightforward when the leadership is committed. That's number one.
Yeah. That 40% is pretty radical for many CEOs, even of relatively high-performing companies, at least in the short term. I reckon that 40% will probably be governance for many of them. So governance clearly plays a role.
I think some will say that's a lot and some won't. So one of my favorite CEOs is Bracken Darrell of Logitech, and he spends 40 to 60% of his time on innovation, on the future. And that should be the job of the CEO, right? Now, if you're a turnaround CEO, you might spend 100% of your time on fixing the business, right? But then the really best companies, they have co-CEOs where one CEO is managing the existing, almost more like a chief operating officer, and one CEO that is just, focusing on the future. And as soon as a business becomes big enough,
I was going to ask you about that because Ping An is an example that you've cited of that. If you were looking to the future, is that a model you would recommend? So if you were if a chair of a company, corporate, whether it's listed or family business, family has a slightly different dimension, and they said, we want to do all the things you've encouraged us to do, Alex. We've read all the books, we've gone on the training courses.
Yeah.
We want to.
So it's both work.
Should I have split roles for my CEOs?
Both. I'd say you need to find the right model for your organization and your corporate governance, right? So I do believe that it's a very powerful model to have two people who are at the same level of power and report to the chairman of the board. I think that's a great model. And at Ping An, that clearly worked. Where it can also work is where you have an entrepreneurial CEO. So again, Bracken Darrell, is a professional manager, but has an entrepreneurial mindset. I used to believe it can only be the entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, and so who could be entrepreneurial CEOs. And Bracken Darrell is a good example of somebody who's been a professional manager his whole life and became an entrepreneurial CEO and took that leadership. That works as well. So I don't think there's right and wrong. The key thing I'd say, there's kind of a dogma I stick to is innovation needs power. And if innovation has power, however you give innovation power, it will work. And when we look at our client base, it's when innovation has no power, there's no innovation that's going to happen. Again, even with the smartest people, the most creative, the teams that test, it's just not going to happen. So the biggest challenge today is actually not the processes. Teams work like this. But when innovation has no power, it will never scale. And that's exactly the challenge that we see in companies where you don't have an entrepreneurial CEO, where you don't have an entrepreneurial CFO, and you don't have an entrepreneurial CHRO for human resources. So it's this entrepreneurial mindset that you need, not to, at the expense of the execution mindset, but it's something you can flip between. Okay, today, or now in this moment, I need the execution mindset. Now I'm talking to innovation teams. I need the exploration mindset. So it's the mindset that matters. Innovation doesn't just live in a part of the company. It's a mindset that you need to be able to turn on and off.
It's knowing your context and knowing the moments when you turn up the dial and turn it back down and so forth. And Ping An is an example of an ecosystem player, and ecosystems are becoming a lot more prevalent in organizations, whether they realize it or not. I've been talking to a number of executives, when you talk about ecosystems, if they use that term, they say, not really, no, we're not into ecosystems. And then you look at their interactions, actually most of their value creation is through ecosystems. But What does that proliferation of ecosystems mean for how innovation is practiced, and obviously the
Yeah,
power that you alluded to? Is it
yeah.
more of the same? Are there subtle shifts from organizations that are perhaps more closed?
I would say it's all about decentralization and autonomy while keeping alignment, right? So you want one strategic direction and then everybody aligned to that, but you want decentralized decision making. And the example I'll give you is another Chinese one. So we always got to be a bit careful with the Chinese examples these days. Not everybody's a China fan for right or wrong reasons. I'll keep that to the political conversation. But if you take Hayer, they have 4,000 micro enterprises to create over $30 billion in revenues. So it's an extremely decentralized model where these micro enterprises within Hayer actually compete against each other because the founder said, I want a platform model where you have an ecosystem, not just externally, but internally. So they're constantly competing against each other. And the speed and creativity of such a decentralized model is unbelievable. So one example is they created first a fridge, think of it, with several doors for vaccines because, in the hospital, when the doors open, the vaccines go bad. But then the person who was doing that said, oh, I want to build a company with several other network, ecosystem partners that don't just look at the fridge, but change the entire vaccination experience. And you brought together a network of players. So within a very short amount of time, they reconfigured the way vaccinations were organized and distributed in China. That's amazing. And with a centralized system, you'll never get to that speed without constantly reconfigured kind of value chains. You're never going to get to that speed. So ecosystems are essential. Decentralization is essential, but you need alignment. If you don't have the same kind of direction, it's going to be chaos and a big mess.
Artificial intelligence has been central to many ecosystems, and obviously there's been a lot of noise and curiosity and indeed experimentation of late, ChatGPT being the prime example. But I mean, generative AI has been around for quite a long time. In the industries I work in and the ecosystems around media and creative, it's been a tool. How are you seeing it being used in the innovation process, and indeed, how are you using it, if at all, as a form of stimulus?
Yeah, I was pretty skeptical first, and then I like to try out stuff because you have to do it to have an opinion. So and I tried out ChatGPT, and you just type in, okay, the pharmaceutical business model is becoming irrelevant. What can pharmaceutical companies do to become obsolete? And then it just spits out, like in 3 seconds, literally in 3 seconds, everything that's going on in terms of business model innovation in the pharma industry. But here's what's happening, right? 2 things. If we take just innovation, right? First thing is, it's based on data that exists. So you're going to get nothing surprising, okay? Number 1. Yes. Number 2, I think it does the job of a relatively mediocre kind of white collar worker or consultant who could make that report just by researching the internet and whatever other data he or she gets. So what does that mean? You need even more qualified people who can take that output from generative AI. So there's going to be a gap. Low-level white-collar workers gone, right? Replaced by generative AI. But high-level is going to get even more sophisticated because you're going to have to be able to judge what comes out of that. So that's one thing that I think is a very clear effect that's going to happen. And the other one is it's going to save us a lot of time for the initial first prototypes. So then my team, obviously, we have developers because we're building the Strategyzer platform. Immediately on to, as soon as ChatGPT, opened their application programming interface, their API, our team started to play with it. And we now can generate customer profiles just by changing the name of the customer, type of segment. Automatically the jobs, pains, and gains are generated. So very quickly, it can generate first prototypes for you but then you have to be qualified to judge, like, does that make sense or not? So
Yes,
it's going to
yes.
speed up things a lot, but it's also going to push us to be even more qualified. It's fascinating how this is going to change innovation. I don't think it's going to replace human creativity. It's going to enhance the
Yeah.
speed and creativity of humans.
I mean, it should be a catalyst for people to up their game even
It,
further
it
in the way
will,
you
and it
said.
will completely white up the mediocre people. Like that's
Yeah.
a tough place to be.
Good. Wow. Good. Good. I think that's good in many ways, as long as they're encouraged to reskill and refocus and do as well. I mean, talking of people, a topic that matters to me a lot is inclusion. People giving the conditions you talked about earlier, where people can give their best and do their best. And innovation sometimes has a bit of a mixed track record. It can be quite a loud, dominant, macho environment. What have you seen and practiced that works in terms of trying to,
Yeah,
develop high performing and innovative teams that
yeah,
are inclusive as well?
yeah. I think the diversity of a team from all aspects is not just gender, but it's also, where in the hierarchy, where in the business is crucial. And I think part of what was holding that diversity back is there were human gatekeepers who would, maybe listen to the people who can make the best pitch around an idea. One of the things that we really believe in at Strategyzer is evidence-based investments, where it doesn't matter who's presenting the idea, and actually the idea doesn't
Yes.
matter, it's the evidence that supports the idea. And
Yes.
this
Brilliant.
can be, done in a process where the leaders who might be selecting ideas, they can't just select ideas based on who presented and what they like and don't like, but they have to invest in evidence. And that will open up, a lot more objectivity and take away the subjectivity. So that's number one. But number two is we have very strong conviction at Strategyzer that anybody anywhere in a company should be able to start their idea to test it. Because, quote Rita McGrath, our very good friend from Columbia University, good ideas and bad ideas, they look virtually the same at the beginning. You do not know what's a stupid idea and what's a great idea. You can't, because it's just an idea. So you let the team start. After 10 to 12 weeks, they have to produce evidence. If they can't produce evidence of customer challenges, pains, jobs, pains, and gains, it's killed, right? They don't go on. But everybody's allowed to start. And it's only based on evidence that you start to kill. So you're taking down the barrier to start, which automatically opens up the opportunity to all the diversity that you have in an organization. And that's crucial because today still, there's too much gatekeeping. If you take the venture capital industry, it's too much gatekeeping, and that should go away. And it will go away when we have more of these evidence-based investment mechanisms and less subjectivity from human gatekeepers.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's brilliant on so many levels. On so many levels. Let's shift focus a bit and talk about Strategyzer and you. You play a number of hats. Clearly, you're a founder, CEO, speaker, author, product developer, and many, many more. What are you best at?
Probably nothing. Best at being the chameleon and changing. So, look, originally, what I really enjoyed doing it, what I was really good at, is simplifying relatively complex business challenges into visual tools. And I've always done that with my long-term co-author and friend Yves Pigneur, and I got really good at that and creating visual books around that. But then when I launched Strategyzer many years ago with a couple of co-founders, well, I had to become, a better entrepreneur. And then just recently, I'd say maybe 2-3 years ago, I realized, well, I actually need to make a really strong transition from creator and pretty good creator. The stuff we started always made a couple of million in revenues, but we didn't make that jump towards a scalable company. So we never, scaled some of the things that were working. So I realized and started working with a breakthrough coach, Shani Ospina, on myself to say, okay, if I really want to build a company, let me become a real CEO and move on from the creator. And that's not a value judgment, that's just a choice. But I was kind of in this space where I was maybe, I'd say it honestly, I was a bit delusional, saying I'm an entrepreneur, but actually I was a creator, and there's a huge difference. And today, I do think I became a better CEO, and I really enjoy it and becoming a better leader. So maybe I'm good at being a chameleon and changing, but I'm also extremely open to trying to become a better version of myself every day. I'd say that's my strength, just not stopping there, not believing, the stuff I tell myself, but actually trying to change and become a better version of myself for the goals that I set for myself.
And that feels real. And you talk about that elsewhere, and that feels real. Doesn't always come across with others. That it sort of can be a little bit of the fake humility. So the people around you, what would they say about your CEO leadership style? What words would they use?
If you had asked 5 years ago, people would probably just be silent and not say very much, right? Because I was impatient. I wanted to move fast. I was meddling with stuff where I shouldn't. Today, I think people, not just I ask people, like, well, what do you think? And a lot of them say, you completely changed. You're not the same person. So today I'm a lot more an enabler. And I had the opportunity to learn from the best, right? So I got to meet, through Marshall Goldsmith, #1 leadership coach of the world, I got to meet Alan Mulally, who turned around Ford. And I really started to understand the power of the servant leader, who is not actually leading by, saying what to do, but is leading by enabling and just making the process work. So you're a lot more as a facilitator. So I do think people today in our team really see that. Worked on myself to become a facilitator. And definitely what comes with that is a much better listener. I was a bad listener. And you can't be a good leader if you're a bad listener.
Yeah,
and then,
true.
The other part is just, making sure that we have brutal honesty, kindly delivered, that we go towards radical candor. And we're still working on that as an organization. I don't think we have full radical candor, but we're getting there. So we have the psychological safety, but what you still need with psychological safety is that brutal honesty. And sometimes people say, we don't want to hurt others, so we're not going to tell them the hard truth. Well, if you like people, if you really appreciate them, you're going to give them the hard truth. It's when you don't care that you don't tell them, what they should hear. When you really love people and you love working with them, that's where you give them the brutal honesty, because you want them to become a better version of themselves.
Yeah, so true. That's so well put. I mean, looking over the last year, a bit of reflection time, what's been your hardest decision?
I think really making this move, and I bought out the last co-founder and saying, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go the full way. And I had to pay my financial errors from the past. Buying back parts of a company that has been growing is always really expensive. But really leading and being humble and looking at the mistakes I've made and I'm still doing and just trying to get better. I think that's always very humbling, right? Because if you don't admit, it's easy. But if you look at the stuff you do, it's kind of crazy, right? And then, I like this saying by Alain de Botton, a modern day philosopher. When you look back and you're not embarrassed about the version you were a year ago, well, you probably didn't make progress enough. So it was hard to change, and it's still hard to change. But I love doing it. So that piece, constantly looking at your mistakes, your errors, your weaknesses, that's tough. But it's also, it just automatically gets you to want to become a better version of yourself.
You're clearly very driven. You've had incredible success on a number of levels. What's been your biggest sacrifices to get there?
I think, early on, maybe 15 years ago, I did sacrifice a bit the time with the family, right? So I was so obsessed by doing things right that I didn't realize how fast time flies. And it was also one of the things, working with a breakthrough coach is, well, what do you really value in life, right? And then you realize it's definitely not work alone. Of course, I want to succeed in work, but success is not work. For some, maybe yes, and that's fine. There's no value judgment there. Everybody needs to find their own version of success. And I do think early on, I made sacrifices that I wouldn't have made if I had really looked at what I want to succeed at. It's several things, and there needs to be that balance. It's not just, work-life balance. You probably have 5 things. You have friends, you have family, you have children, you have partner. So you want to look at all of those, and you want to find what works for you. And I think I haven't done that, 15, 20, 15, maybe even 10 years ago. Today I get to a much better balance, much better relationship with my children. It's hard to succeed and have a good kind of, family
Indeed, yeah,
balance.
it's very, very hard. And what impact do you want to have on the world around you?
So number one, I really want, together with Strategyzers, to change the way companies, the large corporations around the world are managed, not just in terms of innovation, but better places to work. I really believe in that. And I believe with the stuff we're doing, we can achieve that. That's number one. But then, over time, when Strategyzer is at a different stage, I want to become an impact investor. I'm incredibly passionate about Africa. My wife comes originally from Guinea-Bissau, so I'd love to invest in the continent, in particular in impact businesses, where profit and impact is in harmony, not one at the expense of the other. That's kind of my future goal, somewhere out there on the bucket list after Strategyzer.
That's great. That's good for you. And my last question is, when you're having your best, most brilliant day, what fuels you? What or whom fuels you?
I think it's just a mix of working with great people in great places. So I only want to work with people I really appreciate. So I don't want to make any compromises there. And I like doing that in inspiring places, like on a mountaintop, or at the beach. And that combination, those are my best days, when I can hang out with amazing people in great places for work or for fun. That's a great day.
Love it. Alex, what a great conversation. I love your clarity of purpose, your sense of reflection, which is quite rare, and the fact that you are learning, always looking to learn and take yourself and the organization and your impact to the next level. So I applaud you for that. So thank you for that. And thank you for being you. That was another edition of Lancefield on the Line. I do hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Do check out the other episodes in the series with many of our collective and joint friends, and do sign up to the YouTube channel and to the podcast and give us a nice rating. Alex, thank you ever so much again.
Thank you for having me and for the thoughtful conversation. I love chatting with you every time.
Pleasure. Thank you.